Good morning, War College. Yesterday was great. We had some truly impressive keynote speakers. We had two great panels. I think the topic is right on for where we're headed in the future. I hope you have enjoyed the various meals, breakfasts. Buses have been getting there on time. But for today's keynote speaker, it's my real honor and pleasure to introduce the Secretary of the Navy. He is the 75th Secretary of the Navy. And as Secretary, he leads America's Navy and Marine Corps and is responsible for an annual budget in excess of $150 billion and almost 900,000 people. Secretary Mabus has served in a variety of top posts in government and the private sector. In 1988, he was elected governor of Mississippi. He was appointed ambassador to Saudi Arabia in 1994. Prior to becoming governor, he was elected state auditor of Mississippi. Secretary Mabus served as a surface warfare officer in the U.S. Navy aboard the cruiser USS Little Rock. Secretary Mabus is a native of Ackerman, Mississippi, and he received a bachelor's degree from the University of Mississippi, a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University, and a law degree from Harvard Law School, excuse me. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Mabus. Right there.
Thanks. Admiral Christensen, thank you so much for that introduction. I see a lot of friends in the audience. This was my first speech as SECNAV 2 years ago, and I didn't know anybody in this group. Today, I see a lot more faces that I recognize and some that are even friendly. I know that we have a former Secretary of the Navy, Secretary Middendorf, here somewhere. Okay. And we have members of the Secretary of the Navy's advisory panel, the SNAP, that's doing a lot of work on energy and other pretty important topics. Jerry Green, Virginia Kamsky, Maurice Sonnenberg are sitting here in the front row. And my Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment, EIE. If we can find an IO to go with that. Jackie Fannin-Steele, who's doing a remarkable job. I'm really happy to be here at the War College. One thing that Admiral Christensen did not say was my ship was homeported here in Newport on the pier right down the way from the War College. And I spent a lot of time in Newport 40 years ago looking at the War College and being pretty envious of the intellectual pursuits that went on in here. We've had a couple of anniversaries this week. This weekend was the 69th anniversary of the Battle of Midway. And on the 6th was the 67th anniversary of D-Day. So many of the leaders of those two battles, which turned the tide of World War II and of history, were educated here at the War College. So much of the doctrine that came to fruition during World War II first germinated here at the War College. This is a crown jewel of educational institutions, not just for the United States, but around the world. And the future leaders of our armed forces and the armed forces of the world are educated here. I had this point brought home to me. We got back, the folks that travel with me, and I flew in here last night. We've been to Liberia, Angola, Ghana, and Spain. 6 days. It was a pleasure trip. But I was in Ghana, and the CNO there introduced me to one of his staff, a flag officer who wore the crest of the War College on his uniform. He was a graduate of here. And every CNO that I met with in those 3 West African countries and in Spain will be here for the International Sea Power Symposium in October, which brings together more than 100 CNOs from around the world. This institution, the bonds of friendship and professionalism that it fosters, that it establishes, the debates that it encourages, the intellectual rigor that it pursues, creates a far better atmosphere for the world, and it creates a far stronger United States Navy and Marine Corps. Now, while I was on this trip, I got to do what I like to do best in this job, and that's visit with sailors and Marines, particularly forward deployed sailors and Marines. In Liberia, Marines of Operation Onward Liberty, embedded as mentors to the Liberian Armed Forces. Liberia is a country not very long post-conflict, but one which has embraced democracy and transparency following almost 2 decades of civil war. And our Marines are there to help the Army be one of the protectors, their Army and their Marines be one of the protectors of that democratic system that is being so carefully built there. And one of the things that they said, which did not surprise me about our Marines, but did surprise the Liberians, was that they did a course in jungle warfare. And they said that before, they had used some other trainers. And the other trainers would tell the Liberian forces what to do when they got to the jungle, and then would get a report when they came back. The Marines went with them into the jungle, lived with them, trained with them, and did what Marines do and have the most fun doing, living hard, forward deployed. In Spain, I got to meet with the sailors and Marines of our newest carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, on its way to do combat air support over Afghanistan. Those are 2 small examples, and I know you've heard from our great CNO, Gary Ruffhead, and from George Flynn and the Marines about the incredible variety of the things that we do in the Navy and Marine Corps. I told the sailors, Marines of the Bush, that the only thing certain about their cruise, the only thing certain, was that it would not go the way it had been planned. That they would have to confront something that they had not planned for, something that they had not done a workup for, something that they had no notion was coming. No other force can do what we can do. Nobody. No other force can respond as quickly as the USS Reagan strike group did, going from heading to combat over Afghanistan to providing humanitarian disaster and humanitarian relief in Haiti or Japan. Nobody else can respond as quickly and as decisively to establishing a no-fly zone over Libya. We have had this ability to move from one thing to another, to be flexible, to be forward deployed, to give our nation's leaders options as to what the American response will be for 235 years now. This is the legacy of the United States Navy and Marine Corps. It's sort of like my favorite recruiting poster. It's got a carrier strike group, and the tagline is, sometimes we follow the storm to the shore, sometimes we are the storm. Admiral Christensen talked about the topic that y'all have been meeting on at this gathering, and it's energy. And it's another challenge that we face, and it's a challenge that we cannot win on the battlefield, but if we do not win it, it will have profound implications for us on the battlefield. And a lot of you, I suspect, I know that members of the SNAP, I know that the flag community here have heard me make variations of this talk over and over and over again for the past 2 years. And I know you got to be sick of it. But let me tell you why. Particularly here at the War College, one of the things that you do is you look for vulnerabilities. You look for vulnerabilities of our potential adversaries. But you also, if you're smart, look at your own vulnerabilities. What would an adversary try to exploit from us? Energy is a vulnerability of ours. We have to take care of that vulnerability to be better warfighters. We have to take care of this to be the Navy and Marine Corps that we need to be. This is not just sort of one of those passing fancies. This is not just, well, that's the Secretary of the Navy's stuff, and as soon as he leaves, we can get on with the real business at hand here. This is our main vulnerability. We use too much fossil fuels, and we buy them from either actually or potentially volatile places on Earth. We have to change the way we use, produce, get energy. We have to do it strategically. We have to do it tactically. It's something that this president and this administration cares very deeply about. It affects our operations. It affects our budget every single day. Our reliance on fossil fuels hurts our warfighting capacity, brings risk to national security, harms our environment, and negatively affects our economy. And you don't have to go any further than just the headlines. CNO yesterday talked about every dollar rise in the price of a barrel of oil. It means another $31 million that the Navy has to spend on fuel. The Defense Logistics Agency just raised their fuel standard price by right at $39. What this means is that over the next year, $562 million more is going to be spent for fuel in the Navy and Marine Corps than we anticipated. That's way more than the cost of another littoral combat ship. That's what it's costing us. We don't have that money to spare. We certainly don't have it to spare in this fiscal environment. Strategically, we know we've got to change. Tactically, it's imperative too. And a lot of you have heard me repeat these statistics. We import more gasoline into Afghanistan than we do any other thing. For every 50 convoys, we lose a Marine, either killed or wounded. And we take those Marines guarding those convoys and take them away from what we sent them to Afghanistan to do, which is fight and engage and rebuild. So I think it's imperative. I don't think we have a choice. We got to do something about this. As Amory Lovins said yesterday, we have to reinvent fire. And I'm here to tell you the Navy and Marine Corps are doing exactly that. 20 months ago, I laid out 5 energy goals for the Navy. And I am more confident today than I was 20 months ago that we're going to meet every one of those goals. The most overarching of which is that by no later than 2020, at least half of all the energy the Navy and Marine Corps uses, whether afloat or ashore, is going to come from non-fossil fuel sources. Now, when we were debating these goals, there were folks who said, well, yeah, that's good. We just can't do that. It's a little too aggressive. I think you live up to expectations. You get a modest goal, you'll meet it, and you'll get a modest result. We're the United States Navy. We're the United States Marine Corps. We don't do things in small ways. We have always been in the forefront of innovation in terms of energy. We moved from sail to coal in the middle of the 19th century. We moved from coal to oil in the early part of the 20th century. We moved to nuclear in the middle of the 20th century. And every single time we did that, every time, there were a lot of folks that said, whoa, what a mistake. What are you doing? You're trading something that you know works. You're trading something that we know how to deal with, we know how to operate with, and you're moving us into something new that's unproven. In fact, when we moved from sail to coal, there was a board of Navy flags that blasted the decision, that said it would never work. When we moved from coal to oil, the argument was made, but we've invested so much in these coaling stations around the world. How can we just walk away from that infrastructure? They were wrong every single time, these naysayers. And they're going to be wrong this time too, because we're absolutely going to meet these goals. Because I think we're right on the edge of another energy revolution. I'm from Mississippi, and my doctor there, Little Woodliff, so as not to be confused with his older brother, Big Woodliff, was the, and this is completely an aside, but the way my staff knows if somebody is a friend of mine when they call in, if they've got a name like Bob or Mary, they don't know me. If it's Catfish, Diamond Jim, somebody like that, they're pretty good chance that they're a good friend. But Little Woodliff was head of a speaking series, and he called me up, and he said, I want you to come and speak to this group on chaos theory. And I thought he was talking about my administration. I didn't know anything about chaos theory except being in the middle of it. And he said, no, he said, it's an interesting theory, and it's one of the topics that this group has expressed an interest to hear about, and I want you to talk about it. So I go out and I start reading about chaos theory. And there's a more recent book called The Tipping Point. And basically, boiled down to where English majors like me can understand it, it's that systems tend to stay the way they are. They tend to move in very small areas. They tend not to change much gradually. Maybe a little bit at the margins, here or there. But that systems tend to stay exactly the way they have been going until something happens. And then they change just like that. They change instantly and everywhere. And you can see it. I went to Saudi Arabia as ambassador in 1994. Not a single person I knew had a cell phone when I left. When I came back, not a single person I knew didn't have a cell phone. Think of the way you operate. Think of iPads, smartphones. Think of how you communicate and how much that's changed in a blink of an eye. Think of the way you watch television, cable and satellite, and the flat screen that was a military innovation. And it changes just like that. And I think we're about to do that on energy, too. President Obama has shown some pretty astounding leadership on this. And we've got the opportunity to help create the new energy future and the new energy economy for this country. And we have to do it. This country has to do it. We cannot trade for dependence on foreign fossil fuels for dependence on foreign alternative energy technology. It has to be homegrown. We have to be in the leadership role on this. Now, I know that you heard from George Flynn yesterday. And when we started talking about energy, the Marines, being Marines, took it on in a really aggressive, really enthusiastic way, creating 2 experimental forward operating bases, one at Quantico, one in California at 29 Palms, and pushing the results quickly to the Marines. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Unit that took some of this alternative energy out. Solar panels, wind, solar blankets to power things like radios, GPSs, longer patrols, fewer batteries, saved 700 pounds for a Marine company. They didn't have to lug with them in batteries. And you also save some lives. You make them better fighters. You cut them loose from their energy tether that they have. And you may save a little money. It costs $40 million. $40 million, one time. And it saves $65 million a year, over and over and over again. And it reduces supply flights by 450 a year. Just what we're doing now. 450 fewer flights have to go into Afghanistan and 180 fewer trucks. We get them off the road. Now, those aren't big numbers by Pentagon standards in terms of money. But you do this over and over again, and it is. And one Marine saved, one Marine not killed or wounded, that's a big number. That's a huge number. In the 20 months since these goals have been set up, we've been really busy. We've flown a F-18 on a biofuel mix, and we've sailed one of our ships on biofuels. In August, we're going to start testing in partnership with private industry through a joint venture with Maersk, who I think's got a representative here today, because we know that getting commercial buy-in is pretty important. Because while the military can lead, it's going to have to be industry that expands the market. During one of its ships' standard run between Europe and Asia, Maersk is going to look at algae-based biofuels, and they're going to test various blends of algae-based biofuels. And in cooperation and coordination with us, we're going to analyze the results and see the best way forward. We're working with venture capitalists. Because what we can do is we can give them a market. We can sign off-take contracts, whether it's for solar panels or wind turbines, whether it's for geothermal or hydrothermal, whether it's for biofuels, doesn't matter. And frankly, I really don't care what the alternative energy is. We may not even know what it is today. It's only got to have a few very specific requirements. Number one, it's got to be a drop-in fuel, because we got most of the fleet we're going to have in 2020 today, and we've got most of the aircraft we're going to have in 2020 today. So we can't go around replacing engines and things like that. It's got to work the same way. Number two, it can't take any land out of food production. We need the food, and those two things are not competitive. But past that, I'm completely neutral as to which way we go. I have meetings from time to time with Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu, who won a Nobel Prize. And I understand about half of what he says. And that's not his fault, that's mine. But there are some incredible technologies that very smart folks are working on that are right on the cusp of being commercially viable. And that's what we can do. We've got, just to throw out some numbers, 100 megawatts of solar on the drawing board. That's enough when we get it finished to power a city the size of Norfolk. We're also working with the General Services Administration to be part of their electric vehicle pilot program. And we're working on things like geothermal at China Lake. China Lake is now net positive to the grid, which means they give energy back to the grid. They make more energy than they use from geothermal sources. We're doing landfill to energy. We're doing wind power, wave action, hydrothermal. We're doing whatever technology looks like has a chance to work. And while we are an expeditionary seagoing service, we own 72,500 buildings in the United States Navy and Marine Corps, and we're going to make those sustainable. For the past year, we've been building to LEED silver standards, and we've begun installing the early numbers of what's going to be 27,000 smart meters in bases around the country and around the world. And last month in Washington, I announced that next year, 2013, that's next year in Pentagon terms, that in FY12, we're going to have a gold LEED option, but in 13, it's going to be mandatory that every building be built to gold LEED standards at no additional cost. For the same money, we're going to build to gold standards. We got a lot of stuff going on. You've heard about a lot of it since you've been here. We just have to do this, and we have to be good at it. We have to do it because of the responsibilities that have been entrusted to the Navy and to the Marine Corps. We have to do it because we have to keep American leadership in this incredibly important area. We have to do it for strategic reasons. We have to do it for tactical reasons. We have to do it to make the Navy and Marine Corps better and stronger than it is today. And the Navy and Marine Corps of today is the most formidable expeditionary fighting force the world has ever known. But we can be better. Our platforms can be better. This is the legacy of the United States Navy and the United States Marine Corps. This is the legacy of the War College. When our tactics weren't adequate, we have changed them. When technology has been lacking, we have invented new technology. And when threats have arisen, we have evolved so that we can defeat them. For 235 years, the Navy and Marine Corps have been doing this. For 235 years, we've been on the cutting edge of technology. For 235 years, we have been innovating in our tactics and our strategy. For 235 years, we've had the best trained people on earth, and we continue to do that today. And I'm going to go off my script just a little bit here to brag on the Navy and Marine Corps. A little over a month ago, I, like the rest of you, watched the President of the United States stand up and said the world's worst and most wanted terrorist had finally been brought to justice. And that was a great day. And the people who carried that mission out got a lot of publicity, and deservedly so. But let me tell you, everybody who wears the uniform of this country, everybody who sails, everybody who is a Marine, has that same level of skill, that same level of dedication, that same level of courage, that same level of patriotism. And this country ought to be incredibly proud of the men and women who wear the uniform of this country. And that's what we've got to do on energy. We have to be skilled. We have to be innovative. We have to be flexible. We have to adapt and overcome. And we've got to, because we have to come out victorious on the other side. Thank you all very much. I'll take a few questions while I'm still upright from jet lag. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, terrific speech. Thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy day to come in and talk to us. We've had a terrific 2 days of thought-provoking sessions on energy and national security. Yesterday, the focus was on Asia and China. We see in the news that China is becoming more assertive in expanding its territorial claims. Given the budget realities and the fact that our fleet size is below pre-World War I numbers, what is your plan to address the ever-expanding Navy Marine Corps missions around the globe? As C.N.O. Clark used to say, there's a certain quality in quantity. Thank you.
You're right about the numbers, and C&O points out that we're at our lowest number since 1916, just in terms of sheer numbers in the fleet. I think today it's 285 in the battle fleet. We have put in a shipbuilding plan, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, that we have tried to be brutally honest and realistic about in terms of how much ships are going to cost, how much Congress is likely to appropriate for shipbuilding, and what the needs are. Now, while those 285 ships are vastly more capable, you're right that at some point quantity becomes a quality all its own. C&O is right about this. We're going to build from 285 to 325 by the early 2020s. And we're going to do it for $40 billion less than the shipbuilding plan of 2 years ago. We're going to do it because we've just been negotiating a lot harder. The LCS is a good example, a littoral combat ship. When I came into office, there was one ship of each variant in the water, one ship of each variant being built, and we bid out 3 more, and the bids came in just completely unsustainable. So I made the decision to make them compete. We wanted both varieties, but if we couldn't afford them, we'll make them compete. And over the next year, they competed, and the bids came in almost 40% lower. And they were very close. I don't know who won. I consciously decided not to find out who won. But I went to Congress and asked if we could go back to the dual source, buy 10 of each variant, firm fixed price contract. The 10th ship will cost less than the first ship. These prices are locked in, so we can get more ships cheaper, quicker. We've also canceled some programs. We're not going to build the next generation cruiser because the DDG-51 can do all the missions, and we know how to build it. We've been building them for years, and we can upgrade the technology. The things like the LCS, one of the things I love about it is it's modular. You don't need a new hull every time technology changes. So, and it averages about $15 billion a year in shipbuilding. That's a historic average, what Congress has approved. And that's less than 10% of our budget. And I think that's very realistic. So I think we have a plan. And now we're not stopping there. We're going to continue to look at ways to get more ships cheaper. We're going to continue to sort of root out exotic programs. I mean, I thought Secretary Gates had the best quote when he canceled the presidential helicopter. He said, "It's unclear that we have a need to be able to flee a nuclear blast and cook a gourmet meal at the same time." I mean, yeah, same thing with the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle for the Marines. This program started in 1988. It's the only program I've ever known that the test vehicles had to have a service life extension done to them. And the world changed, and the requirements changed, and we can do the same thing. And the Marines have to have an amphibious assault requirement or capability, but we can do it cheaper, and we can do it in a better way for the Marine Corps. So I worry about us and meeting our responsibilities. There's always going to be competitors out there. There are always going to be challenges out there. But what we have to do is have the most flexible platforms and people to do a multitude of missions and to do them very well. Last thing I'll say, it's a way longer answer than you anticipated or deserve, but, I mean, deserved to have inflicted upon you. Not that you deserve to. I knew that came out wrong when I said it. We do, as y'all are all very aware, a quadrennial defense review. And incredibly smart people work on it. And it really is the best look at what the future is going to hold. But you know, if we had done one of those right before the wall came down in 1989, we would have been completely wrong about what we were going to face. If we'd done one on September 10th, 2001, we would have been more wrong than right. And the one thing for sure is we don't know what's coming over the horizon. We don't know what the next challenge is going to be. But the one thing that's also sure is we just have to be ready to meet it, both in quantity, but particularly in quality. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Samson Stevens from the Coast Guard and also a student. A lot of the direction of the strategy forum has talked about the external challenges to security, particularly with regard to other countries' development or the challenges associated with supply. I'm curious how the Navy can contribute to instilling a sense of cultural change within the United States that actually underlies the institutional behavior of the armed services with respect to oil demand, energy use, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you, sir.
One of the things you mentioned early, I've traveled a good bit over the past year, and I haven't been to a single country yet. From the Baltics to Greenland to Western Europe to Western Africa to Vietnam to Australia that hasn't seen energy as a weapon to be used against them, that hasn't been worried as a national issue, as a strategic issue, that they were vulnerable to energy price shocks, to supply shocks, to just not being able to get the energy that they needed. And I think that what the military can do in the U.S. to change that, and it was part of this thing about the tipping point, or the quick change that happens, is we can show that it works. We can create a big enough market to make it commercial. The Pentagon uses 2% of all the fossil fuels that America uses. That's the largest single user. That's a big demand signal. And if you get into economic speak, it's going to be a demand pull instead of a supply push. You're going to have to change the demand signal instead of the supply signal. People are just going to begin to demand it. And I think that's probably true. We were talking at breakfast this morning, Jackie Fanninsteel and I, about the Prius. And when it first came out, every analyst said, that's a funny looking car. Nobody's going to want that. The fact that it looked different, the fact that it was completely different, became its biggest selling point. And I think you're going to begin to see, I think you are seeing things like that happen already. But I think what the military can do is create the market. The military can show that it works. The military can use its bases as test beds. The military can show, if it's important for national security, then it's important for what you buy to go to the grocery store. We have had a history in the military recently. I named some of the things. Internet, military pioneered. GPS, military pioneered. Flat screen TVs. You can go on and on about things that had military applications first that then moved to the bigger society. And I think that's where we're going in energy. I don't only think, I'm confident that that's where we're going in energy.
Mr. Secretary, welcome to Newport, Rhode Island. My name is Chris Seminelli. I'm the Middletown Town Council. Involved in politics. Please don't hold that against me. Yesterday, Admiral Ruff.
I won't if you won't hold it against me. So.
Yesterday, Admiral Ruff had reinforced the fact that we must provide our high school students with experiences that help them make career choices, especially in the military, which provides wonderful careers. He did suggest that perhaps members of the audience rub elbows with their high school students and share their experiences. Please comment on your feelings about the importance of providing clear career choices for our high school students and any suggestions you have to prepare them for the future.
Sure. I think military is one of the most rewarding, fulfilling careers that anybody can possibly have. Now, having said that, 3 out of 4 Americans from 18 to 24 do not qualify to join the United States military. We should be appalled by that. And that's what we have to work on. They're not qualified because of education, obesity, or criminal record. 3 out of 4 do not qualify to join the Navy, to join the Coast Guard, to join the Air Force, the Army, the Marine Corps. 3 out of 4. That's the message you got to take back. Because the people we're getting are extraordinary. And I do think that it's critical that we not just look to certain places. In the last 3 months, I've announced that ROTC is coming back to Harvard, to Columbia, and to Yale. But the military cannot get divorced from the people it protects. If fewer than 1% of this country serves in the uniform of this country. And we cannot allow any sort of divide to happen there, whether it's geographical, whether it's income, whether it's point of view, because we need it to look like the people that it's defending. And so for high school students, yeah, a career in the Navy or Marine Corps, and I'll just talk about the Navy and Marine Corps, is one of the best careers you can have. You're doing something bigger than yourself. You're doing something to protect America. You're doing something to promote democracy. But in order to do it, you're going to have to know some science. You're going to have to know some math. You're going to have to know some engineering. You're going to have to know technology, because there is not a single job in the Navy or the Marine Corps for strong backs and weak minds. And so if they want a career in the United States military, and I do hope you'll go out and talk to them, they got to study hard. And you can tell them that the first thing SEALs do when they finish BUDS training and Hell Week, and all the stuff you read about, is they go to 13 weeks of language school. And they spend as much time in their career in the classroom as they do training and operating. This is an exceptional force. And if you want to be a part of it, you got to be exceptional.
Mr. Secretary, Barbara Goldberg from Naval Station Newport. You mentioned homegrown, and the Navy has been the pace setter with algae biofuel. I was wondering if your concept for energy independence includes enabling the installations with the opportunity to grow our own fuel.
Sure. Jackie Fannensteel, right here, come talk to her. I'm really serious. I'm not being flip about this. If you got a better idea of how you can do it right here, we'd like to know about it.
Question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been concentrating over here. Yes, sir. And then you.
Mr. Secretary, 30 some odd years ago, we had a nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. And an hysterical and uninformed public prompted an hysterical and uninformed Congress to chop off at the knees a vibrant and expanding nuclear power industry. Over the last year or so, our current crisis seemed to have the American public willing to embrace nuclear power once again as an element in our formula for addressing the problem. And then we had the Japanese disaster. From your standpoint in government, do you think that the President and the Congress today has the leadership and the fortitude to go forward in the face of a reaction from the public?
Well, I'll only speak for the administration part of it, but I know the President does. And I know the President has recommitted his support to nuclear power as part of the answer to our energy situation. One of the things last summer that I did at the President's request is went to my home region of the Gulf during Deepwater Horizon and came up with, at his direction, a restoration plan economically and environmentally for the Gulf Coast. The types of fuel we use, non-nuclear fuel, is not without risk either, particularly where we're having to go to get them today. And I don't think you have to look any farther in the Navy than our carriers and our submarines. We're absolutely committed to nuclear power. We know how to do it. We know how to do it safely. And we know how to do it very, very effectively. And I do think that, well, I don't think, I know the President is committed to nuclear power as part of the answer to our national energy need. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, Bruce Watts. I'm a fourth-generation naval officer from both sides of my family. And my question for you is, you're constantly dealing with change. You're talking about the tipping point. You're talking about the importance of technology and working with venture capitalists. My question to you is not focused in the favor of either political party, Democratic or Republican, but my question to you is whether, what your reaction is to whether we wouldn't be better off with a 6-year term for president and not 2 terms, just 1 6-year term, and wouldn't we get more done because so many of our civilian servants at the highest levels of government are faced, and not necessarily their fault, with 2 years of campaigning, then 2 years of working, then 2 years of campaigning. Not to say they aren't working while they're campaigning, but is there a tipping point coming in that regard?
Okay. I'm going to do this very transparently. I'm ducking that question. I said I'm ducking your question, and I want to be transparent about it. This is one of these things, you know, like the minister said, I can preach it round or I can preach it flat. You got arguments on both sides. I don't know. I tend to, the way I approach government is sort of play the cards that I'm dealt in terms of structure. And then how do you operate inside that structure? And the only little piece of my history, in Mississippi, we were one of the last states to go from a single 4-year term for governor to allowing a governor to run for re-election. Now, some people say that the single 4-year term is better. Some people say that it's been better since then. But I do know that whether it's 1 term or 2, the main topic of conversation at the governor's inaugural is who's running the next time. Let me see. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. My name is Lafayette Davis. I'm a student at Naval War College. I have a question. Talks about the future of the Navy. Given the decreasing demographics of our European alliances, France, Germany, Italy, US, you know, they actually not having enough population to replace themselves. And Japanese have a major problem with that. Their birth rate is far lower than their death rate. And given the demographics for India and China, with their abundance of males, how do you see our security, I guess our naval security framework in Europe as well as in the Pacific? If we have a lack of manpower, and given the Athenians lost a war, the British suffered greatly in World War I, World War II, and because they were maritime powers, their power base and their ability to project power definitely decreased and had an impact.
Number one, I can see why you're a student here. I mean, it's a great question. Number two, I'm going to give pretty close to the same answer I just gave. I don't know. I do know that we are stronger together with our allies than we are by ourselves. I do know that things like having a Spanish frigate with the George W. Bush strike group makes that a better strike group. I know that operating with our allies, like the Japanese, like Europeans, like allies all around the world, makes us better. In terms of big population changes, I don't know. I do know that things like that, things like climate change, are going to have profound maritime consequences. As sea levels rise, some of the biggest levels of instability are going to be along the coast because some of our most impoverished countries are along the coast. And if there is a response, it will be a maritime response. And so our challenge will get bigger. I know that as the polar ice cap melts and as you look toward an ice-free northern route, at least in the summertime, within the next 2 or 3 decades, our maritime responsibilities are going to have to change. How you deal with the bigger population issues, I don't know. But I do know that it's something you have to take into account as you go forward. Who are our friends? What capacities do they bring? And what do we have to do on our own? Last thing I'll say is that we are the preeminent naval power in the world. And there's one big difference. There have been other preeminent naval powers. But our difference is we have used that power to keep the sea lanes open and the maritime commons open for everybody, and not just our ships. And that's different. And that's why I think it's so important that we continue to be that global fleet and that global power. All right, I got time, I think, for one more. And I haven't taken, I apologize, but I haven't taken anybody from over here. So I'll do you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Fred Kobrick, Sudbury, Mass. I have a question about ships. We've had a very unpredictable world. The major events have not been predicted. We've had, expensive destroyers that cost as much as carriers used to cost. So the question is, I'm sure you want to be in the Navy proactive, not reactive. But who decides what kind of ships we're going to need, because they take a long time to plan, design, and build? How much of that is coming from the private sector that wants to build certain kinds of ships? How much are different interests pushing certain things? Or how much strategic planning do you and your senior colleagues have control over? How in this uncertain world are we going to plan what ships we really need?
Well, Title 10 of the United States Code gives me the responsibility for equipping the United States Navy. And I take that responsibility pretty seriously in terms of what ships we buy, what types of ships we buy. Some of the things I've said before, the need to build ships that we know how to build. The first ship of a class is incredibly expensive. The more ships that are built, the price ought to and usually does go down. Second is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you've got an 80% solution, use it. Don't try to get that last 20%. If technology changes in the middle while you're building a ship, put it on the next ship. Don't stop in the middle. I think we owe industry basically 3 things. One is stable designs. Don't design the ship while you're building it. Second, you smile, but we've done that more than we should have. Secondly is mature technology. Don't start building the ship and say, well, the technology isn't quite there yet, but we'll get there before the ship is. And third, be transparent in terms of what kinds, how many, and when ships are going to be built. Now, in return, I think industry owes us something. One is that they will make the investments in infrastructure and training that they're going to need to build these ships. Number 2, that every single ship of a class that you build, you ought to have a learning curve. And so the price ought to go down, the man hours ought to go down. Finally, the types of ships we build have just got to be flexible. The LCS is a good example. It's got 3 different weapon systems right now. You pull it into the pier, you take one off, you put another one on. You don't change the hull. You change the weapon system. Technology is going to change. All we got to do is change the weapon system. We don't have to go build a whole new ship. But in terms of the strategy of what ships we build, when we build them, and Congress has the ultimate control of that with the power of the purse. But in terms of what is recommended, in terms of what is what we're going to buy, it's me and the CNO and the senior leadership of the Department of the Navy. It goes that direction, not the other. All right. I wish I could stay longer. I have been away from Washington, away from the Pentagon, which is not altogether a bad thing, for about 10 days. And more importantly, I've been away from my family and my 10-year-old for equal amount of time. And so I'm going to head back to D.C. We started this trip out in New England a week ago Sunday when I named CVN 79 the next nuclear carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy, which and I think it's very fitting that it gets bracketed by that and by this, because, as I said in my talk, this institution, the thoughts that come out of it, the people that come out of it, absolutely crucial to the future not only of the Navy and Marine Corps, but of the United States. Thank y'all.
Okay, it's time. We'll break for lunch. Be back.